Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take the source material you've sent us, all the articles, the research, and we really tear into it. We're not just summarizing.
No, not at all. We're trying to pull out the insights that, really change how you see things.
And today, our mission, based on the sources, seems to be about deflating the human ego a little bit.
Just a little. We're stripping away some of those comforting myths about how special we are. We're going way back into a chapter of history that I think most of us are pretty comfortable just ignoring.
Right. We're talking about the 2.5 million years when our ancestors were, evolutionarily speaking, just another animal, an animal of no significance.
Exactly. And the story starts not with some huge bang, but with a smudge, a handprint.
We're going to the Chaumet-Pontarc cave in southern France. You have to picture this. It's 30,000 years ago. It's pitch black inside this cave.
And someone, an artist, places their hand flat against that cold limestone and just blows red ochre pigment all around it, stenciling a perfect handprint.
It's one of the oldest and, clearest statements of self we have.
It's so much more than just art, isn't it? It's this primal declaration of existence, that deep human need to say, I was here, I mattered.
And that really marks the beginning of what we think of as history, culture.
But the first thing the sources do is take that incredible personal moment and just shrink it violently. They use this grand chronological context to knock our entire species right off its pedestal.
Okay, so let's unpack that timeline because it really does put everything in perspective.
It does. If you imagine the entire 13.5 billion year history of the universe compressed into just one calendar year, our story starts very, very late in the game.
So January 1st, midnight, that's the Big Bang. That gives us matter, energy, time, space, the domain of physics.
Right. Then not much happens for a bit, cosmically speaking. About 300,000 years later, which is still in late January on our calendar, chemistry begins. Atoms start forming molecules.
And then we have to skip way, way ahead. We jump almost 10 billion years into the future, all the way to September.
And that's when, on our little planet, biology gets going. About 3.8 billion years ago, those molecules combine into these incredibly complex, self-sustaining structures. Organisms. Life.
But history, the story of us, of Homo sapiens creating these elaborate things we call cultures, where does that show up on the calendar?
You're only looking at about 70,000 years ago for that.
So in our cosmic year analogy, that's what, like 11:45 p.m. on December 31st?
Something like that. It's a geological blink. Everything before that, the source's frame is this massive prologue to our story.
And that incredibly short, intense span of history is really defined by three huge periods of change. 3 revolutions.
The first one, and this is our focus for this deep dive, is the cognitive revolution. It's what kicks off history about 70,000 years ago. It's this leap where our species somehow develops these unique abilities to think, communicate, and cooperate on a massive scale.
Then you get the agricultural revolution, which really speeds things up around 12,000 years ago.
Totally changes the game. It alters our diet, our social structures. It ties us to the land in a way we never had been before.
And then finally, the one we're still in, the scientific revolution. It only gets going about 500 years ago.
And it's so powerful that the sources suggest it might actually be the thing that ends history as we know it. It could fundamentally alter life itself.
So our mission today is to stick right at the beginning, the prologue to all of that. We want to understand the evolutionary path and the trade-offs that allowed our species to go from this marginal creature to, a world conqueror.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's set the clock to about 2.5 million years ago. The genus Homo appears in the fossil record, and the key message here, the one that's so hard to internalize, is that for millions of years, these early humans were completely insignificant.
Utterly marginal. If you were to time travel back to East Africa 2 million years ago, you just wouldn't be impressed.
You'd see these creatures walking around that kind of look like us, but they wouldn't stand out.
Not at all. They loved, they played, they formed friendships, they competed for status and resources.
Just like the chimpanzees, the baboons, and the elephants were all doing right alongside them.
Exactly. They were part of the scenery, not the main event.
Oh.
And what's, almost intellectually painful to realize is that they had no idea what was coming.
None. No inkling that their descendants would one day walk on the moon or split the atom. They were just one more species trying not to get eaten.
Nobody, least of all themselves, would have ever bet on them to take over the planet.
So to even start talking about how we got from there to here, we need to get some biology straight. What exactly is a species?
The sources use the classic example, which is horses and donkeys.
Okay.
They're very closely related. They can even breed, but the offspring they produce, the mule, is sterile. It can't have its own offspring.
And that sterility is the key, right? That's the dividing line.
It's the absolute dividing line. It means that any new genetic mutations that pop up in the horse population can never, ever cross over into the donkey population. They're on separate evolutionary railroads. Their DNA can't mix.
And you contrast that with, say, different breeds of dogs. A bulldog and a spaniel look completely different.
Wildly different. But they can breed, and their puppies can grow up and have more puppies. They all share the same gene pool. They are the same species.
So when scientists group related species together, like lions, tigers, and jaguars, they use a genus.
Right, the genus Panthera. And for us, our full name is Homo sapiens. That means the wise species from the man genus.
And here's the really uncomfortable truth that, human philosophy and religion have spent thousands of years trying to deny or explain away.
That we are not separate from the animal kingdom. We belong to a very specific and actually quite recent biological family, the great apes.
We love to think of ourselves as something special, a bridge between animals and angels.
But biologically, our closest living relatives are chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. And chimps are the closest of all.
The connection is it's shockingly recent. We're not talking about some distant dinosaur ancestor.
No, we're talking about a split in the family tree that happened only 6 million years ago.
It's nothing.
It's nothing. The sources have this great way of putting it. Imagine a single female ape who lived 6 million years ago. She had 2 daughters. One of those daughters became the ancestor of every single chimpanzee alive today.
And the other daughter became the ancestor of every single sapiens.
It's a 6 million-year-old family portrait. That's how close we are. When you think about the 3.8 billion years of life that came before that, it's humbling.
So, if accepting that we're apes is the first step to humility, the sources say there's an even bigger secret we've been repressing.
A much more active repression, I'd say.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that for most of our history, we were not the only humans on the planet.
We had brothers and sisters coexisting.
We're just so used to being alone now. For the last 10,000 years, if you say human, it means us, Homo sapiens. But if you use the proper biological definition, any animal belonging to the genus Homo sapien, the picture changes completely.
There are lots of other human species.
Lots of them. And this wasn't some brief transitional phase. For almost 2 million years, up until a moment ago, geologically speaking, the world was consistently populated by several distinct human species at the same time.
So the weird thing isn't that there used to be many human species.
No, the weird thing is that there's only one now. You look around today, you see multiple species of foxes, bears, pigs, cats. They all coexist. Our current solitude is the biological anomaly.
And it really begs the question, why are we the only ones left?
A question the sources suggest we might have a very good and maybe slightly incriminating reason for not wanting to answer.
So let's meet the family. As these early human populations started to move out of Africa, they spread out and adapted to completely different environments.
Right, from the frozen forests of what's now Germany to the tropical islands of Indonesia.
In East Africa, sort of the cradle of it all, you had species like Homo rudolfensis and Homo ergaster, the originals.
Then you move north into Europe and Western Asia. The cold of the Ice Age forces a different kind of evolution. And that gives us Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthal.
These were the powerhouses, right? Much bulkier, more muscular than us. Perfectly adapted to that brutal Eurasian winter.
Absolutely. And the caricature of them as these brutish, dumb cavemen is just...
Yeah.
It's completely wrong. The fossil evidence tells a totally different story.
They were highly capable, they used sophisticated tools, they controlled fire.
And, maybe most profoundly, we have evidence they cared for their sick and elderly. That points to complex social bonds, to compassion. They weren't monsters.
Okay, so then you head even further east into Asia, and there you find the absolute champion of the human genus.
Homo erectus, the upright man. And we have to pause here because their story is just incredible.
Their durability.
They survived for close to 2 million years. 2 million. Our species, sapiens, has been around for maybe 300,000 years, tops. The sources state, flat out, that we are very unlikely to ever beat their record. They were the definition of evolutionary success.
And the family tree just gets stranger. Down in Southeast Asia, you have Homo soloensis on the island of Java, adapted for the tropics. But The most stunning example has to be from the Indonesian island of Flores.
Oh, Homo floresiensis, the so-called dwarves or hobbits.
So what's their story?
They seem to have gotten stranded on Flores when sea levels rose. And Flores didn't have a lot of resources. So there's this evolutionary pressure called insular dwarfism.
Where being big is a disadvantage.
Exactly. Bigger individuals need more food, so in a resource-scarce environment, they're the first to buy off. Over generations, the whole population just shrinks.
And these weren't small people, they were tiny. The adults reached a maximum height of about 1 meter.
A meter tall, weighing maybe 25 kilograms. But here's the amazing part. They didn't just revert to being simple apes. Their brains were small, but they were still making and using stone tools. They were even hunting the dwarf elephants that also lived on the island.
So they were fully fledged, intelligent humans, just in a miniature size.
It's incredible. And then the newest addition to the family photo, the Denisovans.
Whose existence we didn't even know about until 2010.
Right. Scientists managed to extract DNA from a tiny fossilized finger bone found in a cave in Siberia, and it turned out to belong to a completely new, distinct human species.
So when you look at this whole lineup, the massive Neanderthals, the long-lasting Erectus, the tiny ingenious hobbits, it just shatters that old, simple picture of human evolution.
That linear model we all saw in textbooks.
The one that shows a single line of ape-like creatures gradually standing up straighter and becoming us.
That idea that Erectus begat Neanderthals, who then evolved into sapiens, it's just wrong. It implies only one type of human existed at any one time.
But the reality, 100,000 years ago, was a world with at least 6 different types of humans walking the earth. They weren't our ancestors, they were our siblings, our cousins, our contemporaries.
And we have to ask what happened to them.
So we've got this incredibly diverse human family spread all across the old world. What was the common thread? The sources point to 2 key things. The first being that massive commitment to a jumbo brain.
The brain is the thing. I mean, if you look at an average mammal that weighs, say, 60 kilograms, its brain is about 200 cubic centimeters.
Okay.
Early humans, 2.5 million years ago, were already at 600 cc, and modern sapiens like us were averaging between 1,200 and 1,400 cc.
And what's fascinating is that the Neanderthals actually had, on average, slightly larger brains than we do.
They did. But we just assume, bigger brain, better brain. Evolution doesn't work like that. It's a brutal accountant, and that jumbo brain had an astronomical cost.
An energy cost.
A massive energy cost. In us, the brain is only about 2 to 3% of our body weight, but it uses 25% of the body's energy when we're just sitting around doing nothing.
25%. What is it for other apes?
It's about 8%. So we are just pouring metabolic resources into keeping the lights on upstairs.
Which means our ancestors must have been under constant pressure to find food.
Constantly. And they paid for that big brain in 2 big ways. First, they had to spend way more time looking for food. But second, their muscles started to atrophy.
They got weaker.
In a way, yes. The body had to make a choice. The sources use this great analogy of a government budget. The body diverted energy away from the defense budget. Strong biceps, powerful muscles, and funneled it all into the education budget, the neurons.
We traded brawn for brains.
We absolutely did. And that leads to one of the great mysteries of evolution. For over 2 million years, our brains kept getting bigger and more expensive. But for most of that time, what did we have to show for it? Simple flint knives and sharpened sticks.
We weren't solving calculus problems. We were still pretty low on the food chain. So why did evolution keep funding this incredibly expensive organ if the payoff wasn't immediate?
It was a huge, long-term gamble. And the other defining human trait, the second big trade-off, was walking upright. Bipedalism.
This one seems more obvious. The benefits are immediate. You stand up, you can see over the tall grass on the savanna, you can spot a lion, or you can spot prey.
And crucially, your hands are free. All the time.
For what? Throwing things?
Yeah.
Signaling?
All of that.
Yeah.
But most importantly, for making and using tools. The very first evidence we have for tool production is from 2.5 million years ago, right when the genus Homo appears. You can't make a good stone tool if you're walking on your knuckles.
But again, there was a huge cost. Our skeleton wasn't designed for this.
Not at all. It was the skeleton of a 4-legged ape, suddenly forced to hold up an upright posture with an increasingly heavy head on top. It was a terrible engineering solution, frankly.
And we're still paying the price for it today with our bad backs and stiff necks.
Absolutely. But women paid an extra and truly devastating price.
The pregnancy crisis.
Yes. To walk upright efficiently, you need narrower hips. But this happened at the exact same time that babies' heads were getting bigger because of the jumbo brain.
So the birth canal was shrinking while the thing that needed to pass through it was growing.
It's a recipe for disaster. Death in childbirth became a major hazard for human females, an extreme evolutionary pressure.
So how did natural selection solve that problem?
It favored earlier births. The babies had to get out before their heads got too big, and the result is that human babies are born essentially premature compared to any other mammal.
A newborn foal can run within hours. A kitten is independent pretty quickly.
But a human baby, it's completely helpless. It can't move. It can't find food. It can't cling to its mother. It's totally dependent for years.
And that biological vulnerability must have completely changed our social structure.
It had to. A single mother could not possibly find enough food for herself and this helpless, demanding baby. It was impossible.
So raising a child had to become a group project.
It required constant help from other family members, from the whole band. This is the deep biological root of the phrase, "It takes a tribe to raise a human." Evolution favored those individuals who were capable of forming strong social bonds, because cooperation was the only way to get your genes into the next generation.
But that helplessness, that prematurity that was born from this crisis, it also became our greatest strength.
It's an amazing paradox. Because we're born so underdeveloped, we are incredibly malleable. The sources use this analogy of pottery. Most animals are born like glazed earthenware. They come out of the kiln fully formed. You can't really reshape them without breaking them.
But humans,
Humans are born like molten glass. We come out of the womb soft, plastic, and can be stretched, spun, and shaped for years and years.
that's why we can be educated and socialized to such an incredible extent.
Exactly. It's why one person can grow up to be a devout Christian and another a committed Buddhist, or a capitalist or a socialist. That immense cultural flexibility is a direct result of being born too early.
So it's very easy to look at the big brains and the stone tools and just assume that early humans were these dominant figures on the landscape.
Right, the mighty hunter.
But the sources are crystal clear on this. For 2 million years, that was not the case. We were weak, we were marginal, and we were terrified.
We were firmly in the middle of the food chain, not at the top. We spent most of our time living in fear of big predators, saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas. We rarely hunted anything bigger than a rabbit.
So what was our survival strategy? How did we get by?
It was all about opportunism. Gathering plants, catching insects, small animals, and this is the crucial part, specializing in eating carrion, the leftovers from other animals' kills.
And the early stone tools obviously tell this story, don't they?
They do. A lot of those first simple tools, the evidence suggests, weren't primarily for butchering fresh meat. They were for cracking open bones.
We get to the marrow inside.
Exactly. The sources compare us to a kind of terrestrial woodpecker. Our niche was getting at this incredibly rich, fatty food source that other animals couldn't access.
So you have to picture the scene. A pride of lions takes down a giraffe. They eat their fill.
And you have to wait. Then come the hyenas and the jackals, and they tear off all the remaining scraps of meat.
And only then, when everyone else is gone, does your small, nervous band of early humans dare to sneak in.
Looking over your shoulder the whole time, you use your stone tools to crack open the femurs and get at the marrow. That was our place in the world for 2 million years. We were not the masters of the savannah. We were its janitors.
So when did that change? When did we make the leap to the top?
Well, you see some human species, like the Neanderthals, starting to hunt large game regularly around 400,000 years ago. But the real definitive jump to apex predator status, that's much, much more recent.
It's only the last 100,000 years, and it coincides with the rise of our species, Homo sapiens.
And that jump from nervous scavenger to top predator happened, in evolutionary terms, incredibly fast. It was a sudden, violent promotion, and the ecosystem had no time to adjust.
What do you mean by that?
Well, look at lions or sharks. They evolved their skills over millions of years, and as they got deadlier, their prey evolved defenses. Gazelles got faster, rhinos got thicker skin and worse tempers. The system maintained a kind of balance.
But with us.
We became hyperlethal predators almost overnight. The mammoths and the giant sloths had no evolutionary experience with a creature like us. They didn't have time to evolve a fear of humans.
And the sources argue that we didn't have time to adjust psychologically either.
Not at all. Other top predators, like a lion, they carry themselves with this air of calm, majestic confidence. It's born from millions of years of undisputed dominion.
But sapiens,
We're full of the fears and anxieties of an underdog. We still have the mindset of that nervous scavenger on the savannah, even though we now have nuclear weapons.
And that combination of deep-seated anxiety and immense power makes us, as the sources put it, doubly cruel and dangerous.
It's a provocative analogy, but they compare us to a banana republic dictator, someone who seizes power suddenly and is terrified of losing it. So they lash out with excessive force and hoard resources because they can't shake the fear of their former weakness.
The argument is that many of history's worst calamities, from brutal wars to ecological catastrophes, stem from this over-hasty jump. We became the planet's managers before we had the confidence or wisdom for the job.
So if we want to understand how that hasty jump was even possible, we have to talk about one of the first and most important technological breakthroughs.
The domestication of fire, becoming, as the book says, a race of cooks.
The timeline on this is pretty vast. You see some evidence of occasional fire use maybe 800,000 years ago, but by 300,000 years ago, species like Erectus, Neanderthals, and our own ancestors were using it daily. It was a dependable tool.
And the immediate benefits are obvious. You get light, which extends your day past sunset. You get warmth, which lets you move into colder climates.
And it's a weapon. A flickering fire is a fantastic way to keep saber-toothed cats out of your cave at night.
But the biggest benefit, the one that changed our very biology, was cooking.
Cooking is a game changer. It unlocks a huge amount of food that is basically inedible for us raw. Think about things like wheat, rice, potatoes. They only became staples of the human diet because of cooking.
It also makes food safer, right? Kills off germs and parasites.
Absolutely. It's the world's first sterilization system. And it just makes things easier to digest. A chimpanzee has to spend about 5 hours a day just chewing raw food to get enough calories,
5 hours a day, just chewing.
whereas a human eating cooked food only needs about 1 hour.
So you've just freed up 4 hours every single day. 4 hours you can now spend making better tools, gossiping, strengthening social bonds.
Exactly. And a lot of scholars believe this newfound energy surplus is what finally paid for the jumbo brain.
How does that work?
Well, the gut is another one of the body's most energy-expensive organs. A long, complex intestinal tract costs a lot of calories to run. If you start eating food that's pre-digested by fire, you don't need such a long gut anymore.
So our intestines got shorter.
Exactly. And the energy that used to go to digestion was freed up. And where did that surplus energy go?
Straight to our heads, to fuel those massive brains in sapiens and Neanderthals.
It's a fascinating theory. Cooking didn't just make our lives easier. It may have been the very thing that made our advanced cognition possible.
And with the control of fire, you see the first real, undeniable gap open up between humans and every other animal.
It's a fundamental shift in power. Every other animal's power is limited by its own body. A cheetah's speed is limited by its muscles. An eagle's flight is limited by its wingspan.
They can't control outside forces.
Not really. But fire gave humans control of an obedient and potentially limitless force, completely unbound by our own physical limitations.
The sources make a powerful point here. A single, physically weak woman with a firebrand could burn down an entire forest in an afternoon.
An act of power that no other animal on Earth could even conceive of, let alone accomplish. It was the first step towards our eventual mastery of the planet.
Okay, so let's fast forward a bit. By 150,000 years ago, we have all these different human species using fire and tools, but they're still pretty marginal. The total human population was maybe 1 million people, tops.
And our own species, Homo sapiens, was still just one of those groups, pretty much confined to East Africa.
But then around 70,000 years ago, something changes. Sapiens start to spread out of Africa, moving into Eurasia, a continent already populated by other humans.
And this leads to the critical question, what happened to them? What happened to the Neanderthals and the Denisovans who'd been living there for hundreds of thousands of years?
And this is where we get into one of the biggest debates in prehistory, with two competing theories.
Theory one is the interbreeding theory. It's the more peaceful, romantic version of the story.
The idea is that as sapiens moved in, they met the locals, there was some attraction, they mingled, they had kids together.
Right. And if that's true, it means modern Eurasians aren't pure sapiens at all. They'd be a mix of sapiens and Neanderthal DNA. And modern East Asians might have some Homo erectus in their ancestry.
And there's no reason to think that couldn't happen. The Neanderthals were intelligent and capable. They weren't a different kind of creature entirely.
Then you have the opposing view, the replacement theory.
This is the darker story.
Much darker. It argues that sapiens and other humans were just too different. Different anatomy, different mating habits, maybe they even smelled wrong to each other. There was little to no sexual interest.
And even if they did mate, the genetic gap was too wide to produce fertile offspring, like the horse and the donkey.
Exactly. So the populations remained separate. And as sapiens expanded, the Neanderthals were either outcompeted for resources or they were killed off. Their genes just vanished.
And if the replacement theory is correct, then all humans today are pure sapiens, tracing our entire ancestry back to that small population in East Africa 70,000 years ago.
Now, you have to understand, this wasn't just an academic debate. It had huge political implications.
Because if the interbreeding theory was true,
It could imply that there are deep genetic differences between modern populations, Africans, Europeans, Asians, that go back hundreds of thousands of years. And that, as the sources say, opens up a Pandora's box of racism.
so for a long time, the replacement theory was the safer, more accepted view. It gave us a neat story of a single, recent origin for all of humanity.
It supported the idea of a universal human brotherhood, all of us sharing an almost identical genetic heritage.
And then came 2010.
The genetic shock. Scientists finally succeeded in mapping the entire Neanderthal genome, and they compared it to the DNA of modern people from all over the world.
And the results just blew the old consensus apart.
They found that between 1 and 4% of the unique human DNA in modern people from Europe and the Middle East is Neanderthal DNA.
It wasn't a huge amount, but it was undeniable. Interbreeding had happened. The pure replacement theory was wrong.
And then came a second shock, when they sequenced the DNA from that tiny Denisovan fingerbone.
They found that up to 6% of the DNA of modern Melanesians and Aboriginal Australians is Denisovan DNA.
So the story is so much messier and more interesting than we thought. The interbreeders were right, there was mixing. But the replacement camp wasn't entirely wrong either, because a 1 to 4% contribution isn't a merger.
It's a small amount. It suggests these encounters were rare.
Exactly. So what we're left with is this idea of a borderline species synthesis. About 50,000 years ago, sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans weren't completely separate species like horses and donkeys, but they weren't just different populations of the same species either. They were right on the edge.
Close enough that they could, on rare occasions, produce fertile children.
But different enough that those occasions were in fact very rare. You could think of those little bits of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA in us as the genetic legacy of the lucky few who managed to hitch a ride on the Sapiens Express before their own people went extinct.
And it leaves you with this truly wild thought. Our ancestors at one time could have sex with what we now classify as a different species of animal and produce children.
It radically changes how we define human.
So, regardless of whether it was mostly replacement with a little bit of interbreeding, the pattern in the fossil record is stark and undeniable.
It is. Almost as soon as Homo sapiens shows up in a new part of the world, the native human populations that lived there before, they vanish.
You can almost track the final curtain calls. Homo soloensis in Indonesia disappears around 50,000 years ago. The Denisovans in Asia, shortly after that.
The Neanderthals, who had dominated Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, make their final exit around 30,000 years ago.
And the last holdouts were the little hobbits, Homo floresiensis, who survived on their isolated island until about 12,000 years ago.
And then, silence. We were alone. For the first time in 2 million years, there was only one species of human left on planet Earth.
So how did it happen? What were the actual mechanisms of their extinction?
The debate really boils down to two possibilities, and they're not mutually exclusive. The first is basically resource competition.
The idea that sapiens were just better at being human.
In a sense, we seem to have had better technology, and crucially, superior social skills, probably thanks to our unique language, which is a topic for another day. We were better organized, more efficient hunters and gatherers.
So as we spread, we just took over the best hunting grounds, gathered the best nuts and berries, and the less resourceful Neanderthals just couldn't keep up.
Their populations would have slowly dwindled, they would have faced starvation, become more susceptible to disease, and eventually just faded away. It's a story of displacement, not necessarily direct conflict.
And the other, much darker possibility.
Violence and genocide. Let's be honest about our own species. Tolerance is not our trademark.
We see it today. People commit horrific atrocities over tiny differences in skin color, dialect, or religion.
Now imagine coming face to face with a creature that was recognizably human, but also profoundly different. Different build, different face, different way of communicating. The sources suggest that if we can commit genocide against our own subspecies, it's hard to imagine we would have peacefully coexisted with an entirely different species competing for the exact same resources.
That's a grim thought.
And this final victory, this elimination of all our siblings, allowed us to engage in a powerful act of collective forgetting.
For the last 10,000 years, we've gotten so used to being the only human species.
It makes it so much easier for us to believe we're the pinnacle of creation, to imagine there's this huge, unbridgeable gap separating us from the rest of the animal kingdom. We're special because there's no one else around to challenge that idea.
Charles Darwin caused a massive uproar just by suggesting we were related to apes.
Now imagine how much harder it would be to maintain our sense of unique destiny if there were still bands of Neanderthals living in the next valley over.
It leads to this chilling hypothesis from the sources that maybe our ancestors wiped out the Neanderthals precisely because they were, and I'm quoting here, too familiar to ignore, but too different to tolerate.
Their very existence would have been a constant, nagging reminder that we weren't that special after all, that we were just another kind of animal, and perhaps that was a truth we just couldn't bear.
That idea of other human species surviving alongside us, it's one of history's great what-ifs, isn't it? It just underscores how contingent everything is.
It really does. I mean, just stop and consider for a moment what our world would be like today if 2 or 3 different, intelligent, tool-using human species were still around.
How would our religions have developed? Would the Book of Genesis have to account for the creation of Neanderthals? Would they too be seen as descended from Adam and Eve, with souls to be saved?
Or think about our politics, our deepest foundational beliefs. Would the Declaration of Independence hold it to be self-evident that all members of the genus Homo are created equal?
Would we have interspecies United Nations? Would we be debating Neanderthal rights?
Would Karl Marx have urged the workers of all species to unite? It forces you to realize how much of our universal humanism is built on the historical accident of us being the only ones left.
The debate about how exactly we conquered the world is still raging. Why us? And not the brainy, powerful Neanderthals.
But the most likely answer, the secret weapon that probably made all the difference, is the very thing we're using right now to have this discussion.
Our unique language.
The incredible capacity of Homo sapiens language to create and sustain shared fictions, shared realities.
And that is the perfect tease for our next deep dive, where we'll get into the cognitive revolution itself.
But for now, it's worth just sitting with that idea from the genetic evidence. That 40 or 50,000 years ago, your direct ancestors were not pure. They were living in a world where occasional fertile encounters with the other were still happening.
Knowledge acquired, context established.
The deep dive is complete.